and I'm going to finish chapter 4 for you. We did the first half, and the last thing we talked about, I believe, was the connective tissue proper. We went over things like density 2, and we're going to look at some specialized connective tissues. We're going to look at cartilage. So let's start off with this cartilage. Now, as you look on the first column on page 142, you see down there it talks about cartilage. It's in a title there, and it says it's found in joints between bones, as well as ears, nose, and even in the respiratory tree, the bronchi and so forth. You see in the second line there, it's tough but flexible. And you come on down to about the fourth line, and it talks about how the properties of flexible and tough result from the components of its extracellular matrix. Here we come back to that word, matrix. Now, notice it has collagen fibers for strength, and it has elastic fibers for stretchability. Come on down, you see the bulb blast, that word blast, that meant an immature science. And so this extracellular matrix in which these chondroblasts, solid like bones, are going to be, but it's pretty cushion. Paragraph, after you see chondroblasts and chondrocytes, and you see the bold print term lacunae. AE in Latin is pronounced as just an E, but it's a little cavity. That's the little space that the chondrocytes live in, those little cavities. Now, notice the next paragraph. Cartilage is one of the few connective tissues that are essentially avascular. A means without, right? Vascular talks about the blood vessels. So they don't have a really good blood supply. A long time for, because it takes a long time for cartilage to heal because it doesn't have a whole lot of blood supply. As you look at the second column, you see the bold print term perichondrium. Of course, peri means irregular collagenous sources from various angles. Extracellular matrix and cartilage. And that's the most abundant one. And I want to come down, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, 7 lines. And it says hyaline cartilage covers the ends of bones where they make joints. Got cartilage in here. Got cartilage in here. Cartilage in here. And you could go on through the shoulder and the knee. And there's under articular cartilage. If you look to the right, it says here it forms a smooth surface so that bones, we would call that our backbone. Some people call it your spine. That's okay. But it's made up of a number of vertebra, and there's are called discs sometimes, vertebral discs, and they can rupture, and then you have what is called a herniated disc. It's a piece of cartilage that's herniated, that's had too much pressure put on it and sort of blown like a tire. I don't know if you've ever seen a tire that has a weak spot on the tread, and the tire will bump down the road like this, or if it's on the side, you'll see this bulge. That's a weak point. Well, that's what we've got sometimes in people's backs, where there's a weak point and bend in so many ways, and they bend their spine, don't they? Takes them a long time to stretch things out. I don't know if that really hurts anything over a long period of time, but they get very flexible. And of course, people like to see all the crazy things they can do. You come down to the very last one at the bottom. Is called elastic. Here, some people would call it your larynx. Larynx obviously is the preferred term, but we'll use that terminology of voice box. So the cartilage in there vibrates. As I'm told on page 143, the differences. You see the little sites in those little cavities. A lot of extracellular matrix there. You come down to the fibrocartilage and look at all the fibers in there. Fewer cells, lots of fibers. And then you come down to the the elastic cartilage, which is found in the larynx. You can see there are a lot more cells and less extracellular matrix. All right, that takes care of cartilage. So let's look on page 145 in your text. 145, inside, and you see bone. Bone is considered a specialized connective tissue. Obviously, it goes through all our body and enables us to connect our hands with our mouths, along with some other tissue, which we'll mention in just a few minutes. So bone tissue, you see the functions there. Excuse me. Support our body, protect. This protects our brain, doesn't it? Yeah. This protects our brain. Got the side all over our body, attached, so that you can close your hand and grasp things. Or you can walk, you can run, you can twist and turn and so forth. Notice also it says stores calcium. That's where most of our calcium is stored. Now, calcium is, I think I've mentioned before, we certainly think of drinking our milk. At least my family did. We always got a lot of good milk, and get your calcium that way. You'll find out in the next chapter, chapter 5, that you got to have some vitamin D in order to absorb that calcium. What we don't need, we store in the bones, and sometimes we draw it out of the bones. It's kind of like a bank account. You can put stuff in there, calcium in this case, in there, and then you draw it out when you need it in your bloodstream or somewhere else in your body. So it's a place where calcium can be stored. And then you see it says housing the bone marrow. That's where our blood cells are made. Now, there's another kind of marrow that they don't mention here, but it's a yellow marrow, and it's got some fat inside it. So just keep that in mind also. The cross-section of bone looks like. You look underneath there, it says bone tissue prepares so that the calcified extracellular matrix is visible. So that's a section going, say, across the bone. Okay. And in there you see some labeling, but you just want to be able to recognize that as bone tissue. When we get into the bones in a few chapters, we'll add some more to that, but that is bone. Now back to this paragraph we're looking at, where we saw figure 418. You see it says the ECM of bone has two types of components, organic and inorganic. As you read in there, it says the organic portion accounts for 30%. The organic substance called osteoid, but you just know that you got about 35% of your bone mass is collagen fibers. The inorganic, now go back in your, go back and read that. Think about that. Somebody might ask you a question about that. But look what it says. In the next couple of sentences down, the inorganic portion, this is in that first column under bone, is composed of calcium phosphate crystals. 65% of our bone structure is calcium phosphate, which means the calcium that you and I take in, maybe through fruits, maybe through milk, eggs, or something like that, and phosphate, that comes also into our diet. We need phosphorus. And so that's what 65% of our bone is made of, calcium phosphate. And you see it says it's one of the hardest substances in the body. That, along with collagen fibers, makes bone very strong, very strong. Now, you come down and you see 3 cells. They all have osteo, which tells you it's bone. Blasts, come on, immature bone cells, okay? But they're the bone cells that deposit calcium phosphate. They secrete it. You see there's another one called the osteocyte. That is one that maintains the matrix. Clasts are bone cells that help remodel bone. Actually, the blast and the clast, so you'll get into when you get into, I think it's chapter 6 or something like that. Little bones can become brittle. So you've got those 3 cells. The blast will lay down bone. The clast will take it up. So if you need some, as you read in there, it calls it receptors in the blood, the bone, and cuts off and on to keep us comfortable in these hot, muggy summer days of South Carolina weather. But it balances out. Before we had to go into sort of seclusion with this virus, a lot of people came to take this course, and they would walk up the stairs. Walking up the stairs puts stress on your bones, and your blasts, osteoblasts, would secrete more calcium phosphate to strengthen those bones. The body adapts to the situation. If you start riding the elevator everywhere and you don't get any exercise like that, then your bones will be perhaps weaker than somebody who gets that extra. That's one of our problems, being balanced. Anyway, the bone is always being remodeled. So it's good to have. Let's leave bones now, and we're going to look at the 2 top pictures. Now you see it says blood unique. This is on page 145, second column. Unique among the connective tissues in that its ECM is fluid, and that fluid is called plasma. You probably, if you've been watching, overcome it. They have produced proteins in their bloodstream, in the plasma, that we would call antibodies. You'll get into it a little bit more when you get right into the cardiovascular system. Those antibodies attack the virus. So if I had it and my wife had been through it, if our blood types matched up, like B positive and B positive, that'd be fine. Then she could give me a pint of her blood, and her antibodies, her little proteins that fought off the virus for her, would fight it off for me. Pretty nice, isn't it? Anyway, 145, look at 4.19. Then what you see is a picture 2 of, looks like it's about to, I don't know why they but this looks like the same picture in there exactly. I just noticed that myself. But let's look at where. As you look at the top, between the 2 pictures, which are identical, You see at the top, between the two pictures, which are identical, you see erythrocytes. Erythro, and you see they call them commonly red blood cells. They have the purpose of carrying oxygen and even some carbon dioxide. They'll take oxygen to your periphery, your fingers, your brain, and all that. Drop off the oxygen. They'll pick up the carbon dioxide, some degree of it. A lot of carbon dioxide stays in the extracellular matrix, but then that winds its way around as our heart pumps and comes back into the respiratory tract, and we release the carbon dioxide and pick up more oxygen. Got to have the right number of red cells, and there has to be the right amount of the pigment called hemoglobin in those cells. Hemoglobin is a very valuable. Down, you see the word leukocyte, blood cells. Now, they've got all different kinds of white blood cells. We do, but you can simply call them leukocytes, or you can call them white blood cells. Just be able to work with both of those terms. And then you see these ones that are called platelets, tiny little fellas, tearing your flesh or whatever. Okay? Bone and blood, and now we're on 146. Page 146, and you look on the second column, your module is 4.4, and then you see muscle tissues. Now don't forget next Thursday, just like we did this 8 o'clock Thursday morning, 6 o'clock Saturday night to get that work done. And remember, once you start, don't get up. Make sure you're taking care of all your business and so forth, and you've got it quiet in there. Nobody's in the room with you. Now, I guess, are they going to point you out as being maybe a cheater? Surely you don't want that. Not worth it. But make sure you look over those learning outcomes. Make sure you can read them and give it. It's trying to help you organize your thoughts, not just recognize something by multiple choice or true or false. All right. Now, let's come down to the triangle there. It says it turns chemical energy of ATP into mechanical energy. Now, you remember the organelle in the cell that produces ATP? Well, we do that from eating, and the ATP is used up by me talking, waving at you like that, walking down the stairs of our home, and so forth. You also find muscle as you come down into the, fourth line. It talks about movement. And of course, we have muscle that helps us move as a body. And you see it includes breathing and beating of the heart. As you watch this, you're not worried about your heart stopping. And you see it's in the narrowing of hollow organs. That sounds kind of unusual, doesn't it? Got rings of muscle, and it's got, if my finger was part of the GI tract, instead of having some of it's like this, some of the muscles like this. So it can squinch up, say your small intestine, and then it relaxes and so forth. And you've got this type of muscle, circular, they would call it, which squeezes and it pushes food down the tract. It doesn't get hung up in there usually. Okay, just pushes it through at a particular speed. Digestion takes place. We don't fully digest everything because we still have to go to the bathroom, don't we? And some things we can't even digest for various reasons that we'll talk about whenever you get into 11. So come down to the bottom on 147. You see muscle tissues made of muscle cells. Or look at the alternative name, myocytes. Now remember, cyte is a root word. So that means a cell. Myo always means muscle. Now if you say myco, That would be wrong because myco means fungus. Myo, M-Y-O, means muscle. Does spelling make any difference? Yeah, it sure does. Okay. So you see they're excitable, which means they can respond, as you read in there, to electrical stimulus or to a chemical stimulus. And then it talks about the muscle cells are different in appearance. We'll get into it a little bit more when we get into, I think it's chapter 10, long muscle cells. Long muscle cells. And they're full of the next bold print term, which they call myofilaments. Myofilaments. Those are little protein molecules. Microscopic, but you've got so many of them, and you can actually make more when you exercise and your muscle gets larger and stronger. So you make more of those filaments so you can do a heavier workload if that's what is needed. Now, as you look on the second column, you see there are two forms of muscle cells classified by arrangement of their myofilaments. Some of the myofilaments overlap like this. Now you can see light between my fingers, but you can't see light coming through where my fingers overlap. So they talk about dark bands and light bands. And so you have a number of those along the length of a muscle cell. And so they will talk about dark bands and light bands. That's where the name striated is alternating, as they'll tell you, light and dark bands. So that is one group of muscle. There's a couple of kinds in there that we'll talk about in a minute. The next one says it's smooth muscle. Now they call it smooth because these filaments are not like this. They're arranged differently. Now they'll lock up. I mean, they won't lock up, but they'll contract and do a very good job. That's why your GI tract pushes food through and so forth, and that's why your bladder squeezes down. It's not made of a striated muscle. It's made out of a smooth muscle because there are no bands. Okay, so that's one way of classifying muscles. Either they're striated because of overlapping myofilaments, therefore they produce light and dark bands, or in smooth muscle, they don't do that. You don't have to know how they're arranged, but they're not in that kind of arrangement. They don't overlap with each other. So that's one way you could talk about muscles. On the next page, 148. You see types of muscle on page 148, and here they have them, excuse me, listed by their location in the body. So when you come down and you see skeletal muscle, it's a no-brainer. It's located on your skeleton, all right? And as you look through there, it simply tells you that skeletal muscle is found on the skeleton and it causes your bones to move, and then you have purposeful movement like starting your computer so you can watch this video. Okay, now let's see here. I wanted to, let's see. Skeletal muscle is under your control. And guess what? The tongue's a skeletal muscle. Got to be controlled. Get you in trouble, can't it? Or do something good with it. But we can get in trouble, can't we, with the wrong words we use and think about. Anyway, notice it says about the fifth line down, it talks about it being voluntary. That means it's under your control. So you can wiggle your fingers, curl your toes, and so forth. And so you have control over, well, I just, see there, I had to use that. All these muscles here had to work. in order for me to scratch that little itch up there. So you have control of them. Now, let's look. It's voluntary muscle. Let's come down to cardiac muscle, and it's only found in the heart. Do you control your heart rate? No, you don't. I don't either. It responds to the demands of the body. You don't think, okay, heart, let's go from 60 to 80, 60 to 100 or whatever. It does it for you automatically. So it is involuntary. In other words, you don't control your heart rate. But as you come down to, let's see, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 lines under cardiac muscle, it says cardiac muscle cells are relatively short and thick, as well as branched and uninucleated. Notice the rest of the sentence. As opposed to the long, cylindrical, multinucleated skeletal muscle cells. Those are the differences. There's also another difference we're going to cover in a second. But you want to be able to tell me on a test, what's the difference between the structure of skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle? You'll look over on a picture in just a minute, and if you come down under where it says skeletal muscle fibers, multinucleated, come down right down 2 lines. You see it's notice also that dark lines separate the cardiac muscle, a feature that's not present in skeletal muscle. And that dark line is called an intercalated disc. It joins fibers together. And it increases the transmission of electrochemical activity through the heart, so the heart beats in unison. Got muscles on top, muscles, but they work together. You can see they're called intercalated discs. Notice at the bottom, it says they contain gap junctions, modified tight junctions, and again, it says it permits the organ to work as a unit. Now, before we go to this one they call smooth muscle, look on page 149 and look at the top. That's your skeletal muscle. Look at the middle one. That's the muscle in your heart. So you see you have long fibers in the skeletal muscle. They're all side by side, long fibers, several nuclei in there, and you'd expect to see a lot of mitochondria, wouldn't you? Because we have to work all day with our hands, our arms. Okay, muscle filaments overlapping. But you come down and you see a cardiac cell where that intercalated disc is, that thicker blue line, that's the end of the cell, another cell on the other side. And you see they label them intercalated discs. Notice they are branched. Look at the top one. And we're looking at part B, cardiac muscle tissue. You can see the top cardiac cell, and it splits into 3 components over to the right, doesn't it? Skeletal muscle doesn't do that. They all just lay side by side. Now, second column, they call it smooth muscle. It's on the skeleton. Smooth is not a location. Smooth is a description that you can sense with your fingers or with your eyes. So what I want you to do is put the word visceral, V-I-S-C-E-R-A-L, V-I-S-C-E-R-A-L. Visceral refers to the organs within the body. Sometimes people have a wreck. and evisceration. E meaning coming out. So your viscera, Viscera, is coming out. It's not a location. Smooth is a description, okay? Just like striated. So I think you really ought to have visceral muscle up there because that's in your GI tract. It's the muscles inside your bronchi. It's the muscle that makes up your bladder. It's the muscle that makes up your ureters that helps to push the urine down to the bladder and so forth. That's all visceral muscle, but it is smooth in appearance, meaning that the fibers don't overlap each other. And usually they'll cross each other, but they do it very slowly. They don't respond nearly as quick as your biceps and your triceps and your muscles on your legs. Okay, one more thing, nervous tissue. Module 4.5, bottom of page 148. Just a little bit here. You can see down there it says the nerve tissue makes up your brain. You know that stuff. I know you have. If you had 110, you've had that. Even if you had basic biology in high school, you probably know that. Nervous tissue, brain, spinal cord, and nerves. So they sort of group it into three categories. Brain's up here, spinal cord goes down our vertebral column, and then all these little networks come out, these little wires that go to all of our body. Think of wiring a house. You got to get it right from that panel that's in some closet somewhere, so that when you flip a switch, it doesn't turn it on in the kitchen when you're in the bathroom. Got to know how to run those wires right. And these are run correctly. That's why you learn control of your feet, your hands, your lips. You have to learn to make all those sounds that we make and call it English. So as you look at the bottom of page 148, you come to the second of the third line. It says the cells are of two main types: neurons, which transmit. And let's back up. Neurons, which can generate a nerve impulse. They can generate a nerve impulse and send it down to maybe another neuron, or maybe to a muscle, maybe to a gland. So our neurons can generate and they can transmit impulses, electrochemical signals. Now let's look over for just a second about these neurons. And you have a picture. You want to be able to identify not only the three types of muscle visually, you want to be able to identify a neuron. Make sure you know how to do that. You might see something like that on the test next Thursday. Test next Thursday, okay? So you want to know this neuron, and you see the parts there: axon, cell body. Axon is a long nerve fiber that carries a message away from the nerve body, the nerve cell body. You see the cell body of the neuron there? I just transposed a couple of words there. But the cell body of the neuron, the axon, carries the message away from the neuron cell body. Dendrites bring a message into the cell body. Never backs up and goes out the dendrites. So as I put my hand on the screen here, oh, it's outside the camera. There it is. I'm wiggling that camera up there. I can touch it. I can feel it. And there's a message. A dendrite's picking it up, sends that message all the way up my arm to a certain part of my brain, and I know that I'm touching. The last thing we want to look at, you see it says in the first column, second paragraph, the most obvious cells of nerve. Isn't that amazing? That's a message there. Axon, dendrite. And then the last thing we want to mention before we wrap this up today, you look at the last paragraph and it says the much smaller cells surrounding neurons are called neuroglial. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Neuroglial. Got to get that tongue flipping up and down. Glia comes from glue, as you can see there. And they help the neurons. They may hold them in a particular place. They may cover them, kind of like insulation on a wire. And that helps the speed of transmission. Sometimes they fight infections for us so that our nerve cells are not damaged. Okay. The last sentence. Unlike neurons, neuroglial cells can divide. So that statement says another thing, doesn't it? It says in respect to neurons, they don't reproduce. They've lost their centrioles. All right, well, we did it in 45 minutes and 20 seconds over. So that's the end of the material that you'll be tested on come Thursday, Friday, or Saturday of next week. All right? You guys have a good evening. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.